Yeah, our principal is also joined with us. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Good morning.
Professor Ami.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Professor Huib, today's resource person. Good morning, sir. Hearty welcome.
Thank you.
So, sir, shall we start?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, very warm good morning to all of you from Kerala. So, I'm very happy and it is my pleasure and privilege to propose welcome to all of you to this wonderful session. So, this is our fourth lecture in the series of the International Invited Lecture Series jointly organized by the Department of History and Bake Jairazbhoy Chair for Indian Ocean Studies and also the MK Haji Chair for Migration Studies. So here in the PSMO college, we, the Department of History, always looking forward to connect our students with the international scholars and the Institute of Eminence. That is the reason why we, from the 2017 onwards, we connected through these webinars and almost the in-person conference that we has been organized in our campus to provide the students a enlarged version of the history that connecting with the multiple perspectives. So our vision is to provide the students a new views and ideas and ideologies to read history on the basis of the Indian Ocean world. We all know that Indian Ocean Studies is a newly emerged branch of history to read history differently, to relocate the historical identities differently. So we, the Department of History, always provide the importance to the reimagining of the Indian Ocean world. And we all know that Indian Ocean is not a matter of a separation, but a symbol of connections. So our prime motive is to connect the people on the basis of this Indian Ocean world. So the Department of History always curious to know more about the Mapila Patu and Mapila songs and Mapila culture, how these culture, songs and the emotions and all aspects of these Malabar community, how these connected to the communities of the outside world, especially around the Indian Ocean. So today we have a special guest with us, Professor Huib Schippers. He is a professor of Department of Music, University of California, and he will be talking about sustaining Mapila music and ecological approach. In this lecture, he will reflect on the challenges to cultural practices all over the world in the face of rapid changes in the technology, travel, and society. Rather than seeking a single answer to such challenges, he will present the concept of cultural ecosystem, a complex interplay of forces that work on virtually every music practices, divided into 5 domains: musicians and communities, systems of learning music, infrastructure and regulations, media and the music industry, and context and construct. After this discussion, you have a plenty of time to demolish your doubt and asking your doubts, queries, and questions. So with these few words, I humbly request, I hope Mr. Shibinu is there, the chair for Bake Jairazbhoy, the MK Haji chair for Migration Studies. I request Dr. Shibinu to preside over this meeting, and our principal is also there. And on behalf of this wonderful gathering, I welcome you, Professor Huib Schippers, for these wonderful lecture series. And I welcome Principal, and I welcome Dr. Shibinu, and I welcome my dear Ami, and I welcome all of the research scholars and students from the Department of History to this wonderful webinar series. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Shibinu.
Thank you, Professor Huib. A very good morning to one and all. I think I'm audible now.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Most respected Principal of the College, Dr. Haji sir. Today's chief guest, Professor Huib Schippers, and Madam Ami is there, and other participants from different parts of Kerala and outside. Actually, I'm giving you a warm welcome at the outset. And under the international lecture series, the MK Haji Chair for Migration Studies, back Jairazbhoy Chair for Indian Ocean Studies and Department of History are jointly organizing the program, and this is the 4th international lecture that we are successfully able to organize. I'm so happy that this type of lecture series are providing a very good opportunity for our students to interact with scholars of eminence from outside. And one speciality that I'm seeing in today's program is that actually Professor Huib is going to talk about the interlink between music and environment. So actually, this is a new thing as far as me is concerned. For the first time, I'm going to experience such a talk, and that would be thought-provoking in all sense, I do believe. See, the college has 2 chairs, one on migration studies and another one on Indian Ocean studies, and these 2 chairs are primarily intending to promote research works in the field of migration and Indian Ocean studies. And myself and Professor Haji are able to organize. Actually, presently we are carrying out 4 research projects under different banners to promote what is happening around Indian Ocean and what is happening around migration at worldwide. And we are fortunate that we have received 2 eminent scholars to chair our 2 chairs, including Madam Amy and Professor Irudayarajan. 2 are actually world-known acclaimed professors who are able to contribute much to the development of these 2 chairs, and we are so happy also. I'm not going to give much. I'm not going to grab much of our time because it's an online platform, and I do express my heartfelt happiness over all the scholars, especially scholars from outside who are taking part in today's program. With much happiness, with much proud, I invite Madam Amy. I think Azib sir, at the outset we are.
we have to call principal. Yeah. So we have to ask the principal to inaugurate the session, and after that we will move to Amy to introduce the professor.
Okay. So I request our beloved principal, actually, Madam Amy, know very much that Dr. Aziz is actually the pivotal force behind organizing all this type of all functions, and he's behind every program which is happening in our campus. And actually, we are at the time of revisit. As Amy know, and our team has they came to our college, and the revisit was also over, and we are actually relaxing right now. And with much respect, I invite our beloved principal to inaugurate the program. Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir, audible.
Most respected resource person for the day, Professor Huib Schippers, Professor, Department of Music, University of California. I don't know how to address Professor Amy. Respected professor or dear professor, that much dear to PSMO college. Anyway, most respected Professor Amy, our own professor, I would like to say. Dear Dr. Shibunu, who is chairing the function, dear Asib, other faculty members, dear research scholars and students joined, and those who joined from outside Kerala. Warm good morning to one and all. Happy to see that things are going well. The Department of History, in association with Bake Jairazbhoy Chair for Indian Studies and also MK Haji Chair for Migrant Studies, organizing different programs useful to students. Third one in the month of October. Today is the 15th of October. This is the 3rd international lecture organized by these 3 groups. First one, October 1st, Amy addressed the audience. Second one, last week, 13th, 2 days before, Mark Arana, one research scholar, who attended, he came to PSMO college and organized one program. Then this is the 3rd one of the month. Then this is the right way. We should try to give, definitely we should try to give things useful to students in this way. That is as far as University Grants Commission of India and also National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC, we used to call that one. They mentioned internationalization of education in India. The only possible way presently is to bring eminent resource persons to college, and also if it is not possible, by utilizing the online platform made available to students that we are following now. Dear Professor Huib, I'm very happy to see you in a function of PSMO College. I think this is the first time we are getting you. Professor Ami is well known to all of us here. Ma'am, I used to call him Ma'am of Januaries. That I mentioned. Okay, in 3 January, ma'am visit our campus. January 18th, January 19th, and January 20th. Then we lost 2 Januaries. 21st January and 22nd January we lost because of COVID. And expecting in the 23rd January again. Then like that, dear Professor Huib, I also welcome you once to our campus to interact with our students, face-to-face interaction. Okay, with these words I conclude. I wish all the very best to today's function. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aziz sir. Thank you very much for the good words. And we also are eagerly waiting to receive Madam Ami once again to our campus. And with I request Ami, Ma'am Ami, to introduce today's resource person. Ma'am, please.
Yes. Well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Aziz and Dr. Shibunu and Professor Huib. Thank you so much for welcoming us. It is a great honor to have Huib Schippers with us at UCLA now. He is the Regents Professor this quarter, the fall quarter, and he's taken time from his Regents Professorship at UCLA to speak with all of you at PSMO College, and I'm so delighted that he accepted the invitation. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn more about one of my favorite topics, applied ethnomusicology. Dr. Huib Schippers is a Dutch ethnomusicologist, just like Arnold was a Dutch ethnomusicologist. He became director of the Smithsonian Folkways. At first, he had a long and very diverse history of research into music education and community-rich music and artistic practice, arts policy, and the music industry. After he established the World Music and Dance Center in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, he was the founding director of the innovative Queensland Conservatorium Research Center at Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia, from 2003 to 2015. Then he became director of Smithsonian Folkways. That is, he was founded by Mose Ash, the Folkways recording label, which was a 40-year-old record label of non-classical musics of the world that was acquired by the National Museum of the United States, the Smithsonian Institution, which is actually the largest museum complex in the world. It's a collection of institutions and museums in the United States. The label they acquired, they now call the Robot, or in an affectionate tribute to the founder of Folkways Records, they call it the Mobot, because Moses Ash was the founder of Folkways Records. So they call it the Mobot because it's a computer system that's capable of producing a CD copy of any record in its collection, in its vast collection of published recordings, including the artwork, the label, the cover work, the explanatory notes, all on demand. So it never, no recording ever goes out of date. So one such album was actually created about Nazir Ali Jairazbhoy. He didn't realize they were going to publish it, but he gave a lecture at the University of Washington about the rags of North Indian music. And well, he had a lot of trouble because he was not used to talking about rags. He just learned to play them as a child and was a fine sitarist, but he didn't know how to talk about the theory of the music. He was just learning it the way most natural musicians learn, by ear and by imitation. But theory became an important issue sometime in the world, and Indian music became a subject of theoretical discussion. I hope you can listen to that recording, but he really doesn't like it at all. So keep that in mind, that he was just trying to play the sitar that his sister-in-law had brought to him from India, and it wasn't a very good sitar, etc., etc. So there are problems with that recording, but most of the other folkways recordings are without a doubt unique in the field. You know, Professor Schippers has suggested that we all read his chapter in one of the first books on applied ethnomusicology. The first book occurred in 2008 from a symposium, and then there was one in 2010 and 2011. This book was in 2015. The article is called Applied Ethnomusicology and Intangible Cultural Heritage, Understanding Ecosystems of Music as a Tool for Sustainability. And he's going to talk about that today. I'm especially pleased that he's taken the subject of applied ethnomusicology so far in his career, because I created the term applied ethnomusicology in 1985 to try to explain the work that I was doing with refugees from Cambodia and Laos in the Indian Ocean, who came as refugees to the United States. And I adopted the methodology from the field of anthropology, who already had a fifth field of anthropology called applied anthropology. So I called it applied ethnomusicology and defined it as a methodology that applies the tools of ethnomusicology outside of educational and academic settings in order to facilitate social change in communities using collaborative processes. So applied ethnomusicology is a way to make history happen in communities using music. It's a way to create change in the way we use music in societies. So this field of applied ethnomusicology took off like a bomb in the Society for Ethnomusicology. It became the fastest growing unit of Society for Ethnomusicology, creating, now we have several books that have been published and much work that has been done under this umbrella term of applied ethnomusicology. So I'm really delighted that Huib is going to take us further into the field of applied ethnomusicology in the context of the Indian Ocean and the context of Kerala and the Mappila community. So I'd like to invite Professor Schippers to please share his knowledge with us and enlighten us. Thank you very much, Huib.
Thank you so much for that beautiful. Thanks so much for the beautiful introduction, Amy, and thank you, Mohammed, Dr. Aziz, Dr. Shibunu, for your introductions to this. May I first commend you on this initiative. As you just heard from Amy, I used to run a large music school in Australia. And one of the things we found is that it was very difficult to stay in touch with the rest of the world. There is feedback through one of the microphones, I think. So
yeah, Amy, could you please put off your microphone?
I'm trying to find it. Oh, here.
Yeah. The below one symbol is there, microphone symbol. You have to click on that.
Below it. I see the audio symbol.
Of your, audio symbol, you have to click on that.
I clicked it. I'm clicking it. It's just not doing anything.
On the lowest line on the left.
Oh, it says me, you, on the lowest.
Turn off microphone, it should say.
Oh, I see.
Fantastic.
Now it's okay. Right.
Yeah, I think feedback's gone good. So I wanted to commend you on this initiative, because running a big music school in Australia, I found that it was really difficult for us to have an idea of what the global environment was in which we were working. And I invited many people to try to fly over or to do sessions like this, which helped students and staff enormously in getting an idea of what things are there, because we all hate Zoom and Google Meets because of COVID, but we also should feel blessed because we can Something's happening to the screen. Great, everything's back. We should also feel blessed that we can have these moments of contact with each other from one day to the next, because Amy and I are still living yesterday here. It is 10 p.m. on the 14th here. I'm also very pleased to be able to talk about the idea of cultural ecosystems and the idea of intangible cultural heritage. When we developed this project between 2009 and 2014, the idea, there were 9 universities involved, and all of them wanted to have the copyright on the outcomes of it and wanted to have the rights to the and I fought with 6 different legal departments saying, no, I want the outcomes of this. We're working with communities. I want the outcomes of this to be freely available to everybody in the world. And from the beginning, we all committed that if there were questions about how can we use this for our culture, that we would be there to share whatever we understood. You have to understand that my predecessor, Arnold Barker, was an expert on Mapila music. I'm not. I'm a humble sitarist, much like Amy's late husband. And actually, I had his LP when I just started playing sitar at age 16. So I know that album well. So I'm quite familiar with India. I'm quite familiar with the Indian culture, but my focus has been Hindustani music. But having read a little bit into the music, I hope I can say things which are not completely nonsensical. But I want to emphasize that I am not here as an expert on Mapila music. I'm here as somebody who developed an idea of how we can look at traditions that communities value and how we can look at them intelligently in an ecological way with the purpose of keeping them stronger. And that's where my story begins. If I speak too fast, which is a tendency that I have sometimes, please let me know and I will slow down. I'm going to try something really exciting, which is to share my screen with you, which is this screen, and then I will go to my PowerPoint. Can somebody confirm that you can see this now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've called my presentation Sustaining Mapila Music, an Ecological Approach. And I'm very pleased to be able to do this from UCLA, where, as Amy said, I had the incredible honor of becoming the Regents Professor. Only once a year, the University of California system, which is all the universities in California, choose a Regents Professor because they think they can contribute to the intellectual climate of the university. And I'm very, very pleased to be here for 11 weeks in one of the meccas of ethnomusicology. So we're living in a world where globalization has both benefited and harmed a lot of cultural traditions. I'll come back to this in a second. In such a world, how can Mapila music, poetry, and dance best be sustained? It seems to be the question that you're asking yourself. I'm deliberately using the word sustainable. There have been terms like safeguarding from UNESCO, preserving, maintaining, revitalizing, but I prefer sustaining, partly because of its etymological background. While maintaining means holding into your hand, sustaining means, from the French soutenir, means holding under your hand under something. And to my mind, it is more important that we support the entire ecosystem around a particular music practice than trying to hold it and capture it and not make it breathe and develop. There are many sustainability initiatives across the world. Most of them are local and national. The most influential currently is the 2003 UNESCO Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. My colleague Anthony Seeger and I just published a book with Oxford University Press about this, and it's a fascinating story about how people wanted to enable communities to support their own cultures, but because UNESCO is a nation-state-based organization, we've seen the balance and the power shift from communities to governments, which has not always worked well across the world. But that's a different story for now, but it's important to note that there are many sustainability initiatives. People care about this. Many people speak very negatively about the situation of music worldwide. I don't agree with them. I think that globalization, for all the bad things that it has done, has made music easily accessible across the world at a scope that would have been impossible to imagine 100 or 1200 years in the case of popular music ago. So more people can listen more easily to more music than any time before in the history of mankind. But at the same time, we see that all over the world, smaller traditions like Mapila are struggling to survive in an environment that has changed rapidly because of the developments in societies, in migration, in technology and media in the last 2 centuries, or the last 100 years rather. If we look at traditions and change, we see still many living traditions. Across cultures and eras, music genres and styles have always emerged, changed, and sometimes disappeared. And I don't think that the disappearing of any tradition is really problematic. It is problematic if they happen due to unprecedented change, like they have in the past 50 or 70 years, where many traditions are, in the words of Tony Seeger, being disappeared beyond the normal process of musical evolution. If a community says, we don't want to listen to this, and finally, there's technology, which has brought far-reaching changes in what people actually listen to. The access that we have to music now is enormous, but it also means that the choice of people is enormous. With that disappearing of music, there's been a call for preservation. And there's a long tradition of initiatives to preserve music practices, which goes back way beyond before the modern era. Communities have always done things to preserve their own music practices, but also kings, maharajas, nawabs in India have put a lot of money and a lot of effort into preserving the music practices they valued. More recently, the important factors are financial and infrastructural support by public authorities. And I mean, for instance, the enormous support that's been given to opera and Western orchestras in the Western world, where both the concert halls and the opera halls and the ensembles are very, very expensive. Interestingly, about 85% of public funding in places like Europe and Australia goes to funding these particular types of music rather than other types of music. Then there are grants and interventions from foundations, from NGOs, from companies, and from donors and private patrons. This has always been important and continues to be important. And for instance, in a country like America, where the National Endowment for the Arts only gives a very, very small amount of the money that's needed to support the arts sector, There's much more work through foundations and private patrons. Then there are small and large-scale efforts in documenting and archiving, and this is very moving work. And Amy has been involved with this, and many other people here. I'm working with UCLA Archive. When I was running Smithsonian Folkways, the record label, we have a large archive there, which supports the 75,000 tracks that we make available to everybody across the world. And there's some very peculiar systems which I find really appealing, like the Asian system of living national treasures, which started in Korea and Japan, where the actual musicians are being declared living national treasures because they embody, particularly in oral traditions, they embody so much of the music that the government says these are our living treasures. It's not a pile of scores of Western classical music, but it's these living musicians. So they are getting a stipend and they're being asked to keep transmitting their music or keep creating, which I think is a very elegant system. And then, as I mentioned before, there's the UNESCO Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, which we see criticized in many places in the way it is carried out, but at the same time, it has caused a rise in awareness of the importance of intangible cultural heritage, like Mapila, unlike anything else ever in the world. And it has spurred on a number of countries to invest very, very heavily in that. And probably China is the best example of that. China is literally putting billions of dollars a year into their intangible cultural heritage across all their ethnic minorities and the Han majority. So all these interventions or initiatives, they certainly have merit, and some have had quite a bit of impact, but they still run the risk of preserving the product rather than a culture conducive to continuing vitality. So in my mind, and in the mind of many of my colleagues, just recording the music or just preserving a particular practice of a music is not the same thing as maintaining a living tradition. So if you focus too much on the product, that approach can lead to ossification, which means it becomes like bones and unflexible, and ultimately decline. Because one of the great things about living tradition, and India is so rich in these living traditions, is that living traditions adapt from generation to generation to new audiences, to new technical possibilities, to new social circumstances. And because they keep adapting, they keep having an audience that they appeal to. If you keep a music exactly the same as it was 100 years ago, there's a good chance that modern day audiences will not respond to it quite in the same way. So I'm very much in favor of living traditions, although I acknowledge that some more static traditions like Drupad in India or Western classical music from the 18th century are still very, very valid forms of music making. But rather than looking at product, there's a more complicated but ultimately more potentially rewarding way, which is the idea to try to steward cultural ecosystems, which can keep music practices alive and vibrant within the communities, like the Mapila, who seem to be a very driven and enthused community. I've spent a lot of my adult life, in addition to trying to learn sitar, traveling to many different continents to look at musical practices and how people transmit their musics. And I found that most cultures have many grumpy people that say, oh, it's not like it used to be, the young musicians can't play anymore. But these voices go back hundreds of years. I've got sources in 1864 in India where they say, oh, the great ustads and pandits, they play amazingly, but look at their sons. It's complete nonsense what they're playing. And this has been going for hundreds and hundreds of years. And out of that, we got this amazing generation of great masters in the middle of the last century. So I'm not sure that music goes down all the time. But I do think it is interesting to look at all the forces that play on the music, because I really get the same thing from people working in opera. We're working in Hindustani music, working in West African percussion, working in gamelan in Indonesia, working in mariachi in Mexico. So everybody seems to have this idea that there is more than the actual product, that there's a support structure that needs to be there. In my travels, I moved to, I was in Hanoi for the first time in Vietnam at a conference on how people learn music professionally. And during the interval, during half-day break, we are in a 6-day conference, which is very usual, and we were invited to go to a silk temple or to a silk factory or to go to a temple and be treated like tourists, which I'd done so many times that I thought this is not so interesting, and I'm in Vietnam now. So I asked a group of the young teachers, asking, can you recommend me or take me somewhere where I can see a little bit more of the real Vietnam rather than what you want to show the tourists? They were a little bit puzzled, but Pham Thi Huệ, who you see in the middle of this photo here, she said, would you like to go with me to a village about 35 kilometers outside of Hanoi, where my 74-year-old Kachu master, Master Chuk, who recently passed away, sadly resided. I thought that was a very interesting offer. So we took, while everybody else was going on the bus, we got in a taxi and drove to this little village. And in her little house, she sang for me and she taught Hui. And she also explained how after a period of flourishing around the middle of the 20th century, the genre Kachu had all but disappeared, losing its audiences, its performance format, its funding, its transmission settings, and its prestige. This was not because the music was not interesting or beautiful. It's a beautiful form of sung poetry accompanied by the lute. And I thought, this is really interesting. So maybe it's not... We're kind of taught to think that music that is great music will always survive and other music just has to disappear. But there was nothing wrong with this music. There was something wrong with the environment where that was played in. It was first played in the villages, and then it went into houses in the city, and it became really entertainment, but it became associated with drinking lots of alcohol and in some places prostitution, not unlike the Baijis and the Devadasis in India. And when the communist regime came in, they said this is bad music and everybody has to stop and go back to the fields and work there. So for many, many, many decades, this music was completely ignored there, and it had nothing. It had no basis, which we expect with almost all musics that we deal with. So out of that came a question in my mind, to define a model or a framework that maps out all or most of the key forces that work on the vitality and sustainability of diverse music practices around the world, taking into account social changes, evolving traditions, globalization, industry, and technological developments. I'm not the first one who started thinking in this direction. So there's an article by William Archer from 1964 that's already talked about, should we look at the forces around the music rather than just the music itself? And then Neumann, who worked here at UCLA with Amy and Jairazbhoy, in 1980 wrote his book, The Life of Music in North India, where it's an entire chapter on the ecology of music. But we've tried to see if we could push it one step further. I was working in Australia at the time, and I had a very good relationship with the Australian Research Council. And in order to test the idea of cultural ecosystem, we designed a 5-year, $5 million project carried out in a global partnership with 6 universities and 3 NGOs on 4 different continents, funded by the Australian Research Council, with the following aim: mapping the contours of cultural ecosystems to identify and disseminate insights and mechanisms to empower communities worldwide to forge musical futures on their own terms. There's a lot of important words in here, and the 2 things I want to emphasize is that this was not for our own academic gain, but this was really about working with communities, for communities, and making the material available for communities to choose how they wanted to work. In the past, many ethnomusicologists inevitably had particular aesthetic choices, and they helped communities to do one thing but not to do the other thing. I think that is still a form of colonialism. So we wanted to stay away from that. We wanted to see if we can understand how things work and then give it back to communities like the Mapila, like I'm doing right now, in order for them to choose how they wanted to work with the information that we could give them. It is quite complicated to have 9 research teams across the world working in very different contexts. One thing that was very important is we chose to conduct these 9 case studies in widely different contexts and states of well-being to yield robust data for a systematic examination of what factors play a role in sustainability or disappearing. Much of the research on disappearing musics has been obviously on music that are disappearing. But if you want to see what are the success factors for music to survive, you shouldn't only look at the disappearing musics, you should also look at very strong musics that are very solid. So by not only choosing music that were endangered, but also those which were stable or even thriving, we hope to also gain insight into the degree to which positive factors can be operationalized in safeguarding efforts. And in that way, we hope to lay the basis for a more comprehensive overview of music traditions, their ecologies, and potential successful interventions. Because the idea that you just throw money at a tradition has not proven to be very successful. As you know, Mapila was not one of the case studies. Hindustani classical music was, but it's easy to imagine a case study on this unique tradition with such a rich history and culture. You've got an auspicious history, which is linked to the spread of one of the world's most influential religions and cultures. You still have strong roots in the community from everything I see and read. But like all traditions, people are surrounded by many other distractions at the moment, and I'm sure you're facing that. It seems that Mapila has embraced contemporary realities. I've seen video clips and things like that online, like the rise of technology, but it still needs to carefully navigate challenges and opportunities, like every music does and every music has always done for thousands and thousands of years. So how did we get a template to do the research, which was sufficiently free for people to find whatever they found, but it's sufficiently structured at the same time that in giving back the data, we could do something with them. With a lot of work mostly by Kathy Grant, my colleague, who's still in Brisbane, and myself, we had 9 case studies run by different teams on 5 different continents. This is really uncommon in ethnomusicology. Ethnomusicology had 2 false starts in comparative ethnomusicology. One was the very beginning as Vergleichende Musikwissenschaft in 1885, where basically every music was compared to Western classical music, and the further it was away from Western classical music, the more primitive it was seen to be. That is not a very tenable position. And then there was cantometrics in the 1960s and 70s, which was a very interesting idea to see how much of what happened in music was a reflection of what was happening outside in society. Sadly, Lomax, who came up with this idea, pushed it a little bit too much, and it lost credibility because it was overclaimed. So in 2 big waves, ethnomusicologists have learned to avoid comparative work as much as possible. And this was a very big project doing comparative work where we were warned by our predecessors not to use Eurocentric ideas as a principle, and also not to overclaim what came out of this. So in thinking and talking to many people, I admitted from the beginning that I was not smart enough to do this project myself. We examined every case study through the lens of 5 domains that influence musical vitality. One is musicians and how they interact with their communities. And now the next one is what systems there are of learning music and of teaching music. Then we looked at infrastructure and regulations, which is like the hardware of music practices. We looked at media and the music industry, including the internet, of course. And we looked at context and constructs. Context is pretty straightforward. Constructs means the values and attitudes underlying a particular musical tradition. Across these domains, we made over 200 detailed but open-ended questions and issues which were defined in guidelines common to all the case studies, so that we had some kind of consistency in approach. Then we made very sure that we got appropriate ethical clearance and detailed informed consent forms for all the participants, and we spoke to more than 200 people for this project, which were used to protect them as they inputted into the projects. In addition, we made sure that there were guidelines for the format of text and audio and video data in line with archival standards, so that the data could be moved into an archive afterwards. So let me talk a little bit about each of those domains. It may sound really boring when you think about it, and it's also certainly not the only way in which you can divide the forces that work on any music practice, but let me see if I can give you some insight in how they worked. The first domain is musicians and community, and that domain examines the role and position of musicians and the basis of the tradition within the community. It looks at everyday realities into the existence of creative musicians, including the role of technology, media and travel, and issues of remuneration, being paid through tenured employment, portfolio careers, community support, and freelancing. We also look here at cross-cultural influences and the role of diaspora, which is, of course, very important in Mapila. And we also looked at interaction between musicians within the community. We find that some musicians gather together very nicely and become a strong unity. And in other cultures, like Hindustani music, people do not work together particularly well. I'll give you a sample of some of the questions there. We asked, is your music culture part of an indigenous, minority, majority, diaspora community? Relevant for Mapila. What is the role of people who make music within your culture or community, and what is their status? Musicians in some cultures have a very, very high status. In other cultures, they have a very low status. This is important for sustainability. Another thing that's important is, are musicians paid for performances? There are some cultures in which musicians make music outside of their daily work, and in other cultures, they need to make money in order to keep being musicians. And who makes music in your community? Is it everyone? Is it trained musicians only? Is it men only? Is it women only? So there's many ways of you can talk about who makes music in the tradition. And how do musicians typically relate to each other in the culture? Is it collaborative? Is it through formal or informal networks? Is it supportive? Is it competitive? These are also very important things. For instance, the musicians' unions that you see in America and in Europe have made a lot of difference in how much money musicians get for every performance that they do. We'll move on to the next domain, systems of learning music, which very often in its musicology has been underemphasized. People say, oh yes, it's handed down orally, but in fact, the way music is handed down is of incredible importance for sustainability. So this domain assesses balances between informal and formal training, notation-based and oral learning, holistic and analytical approaches, and emphasis on tangible and less tangible aspects of musicking. It explores contemporary developments in learning and teaching, from master-disciple relationship, like the Guru-Shishya or Ustad-Shagird relationship, to formal institutional curricula, like conservatoire and schools of music, to systems based on technology and internet. Many people now learn music through YouTube. And we also looked at how non-musical activities, philosophies, and approaches intersect with learning and teaching. Islam obviously plays an important role in Mapila, and that has influence on how the music is learned, what kind of status it has, how it has been taught. So in the sample questions, what you would consider to be the ideal way to become a musician in your culture? In some places, through birth. In some places, it's through a community. In other places, a private teacher like a guru plays a major role, an institution like a prestigious music school, or a combination of those. Then we asked whether there were formal structures or regulated progressions in skill level for music learners. And this can happen in very formal places where there's exams, but we found it can also happen in very informal places, like in Hawaii or in Central Asia, in Central Australia. The people that learn have to prove they have a particular level before they deserve the next level of music learning. And in some places, music learning training leads to a formal qualification or recognition. In other places, it doesn't. All the great gurus, the great performers of Hindustani music have no qualifications, but yet they're amazing musicians. And there's many mediocre musicians in Europe that have a qualification from a conservatoire, but are not good enough to be performing musicians. Another question was, do learning aids play a role in teaching and learning your music culture, and which roles do they play? So learning aids may be maybe scores, but it might also be cassette recorders, it may be instruments, there's all kinds of different things. And then very importantly, which non-musical philosophies or approaches are formally or informally learned by musicians in your music culture. I realized after 20 years of studying sitar with my two gurus, I had learned so much about the approach you had to take in music, and also they were both Muslims, so I learned things about Muslim, but they were also closely aligned with Sufism and with Hinduism. So I learned so much from them in other ways, and also the music as a philosophical approach was very important. So we all learn many things by just sitting in the house of our gurus and having tea with them, or visiting musicians, or going to a concert. And we try to document all these things. The third domain is infrastructure and regulations. That domain primarily relates to the hardware of music, places to perform, compose, practice, and learn, all of which are essential for music to survive, as well as virtual spaces nowadays for creation, collaboration, learning, and dissemination. So that's the infrastructure side. In that same area is the availability and manufacturing of instruments and other tangible resources. In many cultures, it is difficult to keep making instruments of quality because the resources, the materials are not there anymore. In the field of regulations, it also examines the extent to which regulations are conducive or obstructive to a blossoming musical heritage, including grants and subsidies, which tends to be conducive, artist rights, copyright laws, which also are conducive, which brings money to the artists, but also sound restrictions and laws limiting artistic expression, like censorship, which are quite detrimental to music. The sample questions we wrote here, I couldn't write them all because we'd be speaking for several hours. Where do musicians perform, create, learn, and record? What other conditions are needed for performing, creating, and transmitting your music practice? This is, do you need big halls? Do you need schools? What do you need in that sense? What musical instruments and other tangible resources are required for performing, creating, or transmitting your music culture? And are they difficult to source? So this includes the clothes that musicians wear, the stages that they're with, any ritual aspects of it. Then we asked what external support, if any, is available for your music, such as government backing, sponsorship, grants, funding, institutional community support for venues, public support from audiences, like purchase of recordings or radio airplay. Then the next domain, which is very important for sustainability, is media and the music industry. That domain examines modes of disseminating music and all the activities that bring income to musicians and related professions. Over the past 100 years, the dissemination of music has shifted dramatically with the development of technologies enabling recordings, radio, television, and now most importantly, the internet, through download, streaming, podcasts, and YouTube, which has really transformed the musical landscape, both at a scope and at a speed that we have not seen before in the history of the world. Most musicians and musical styles depend in one way or another on the music industry for their survival, from income through live performances to recordings, from broadcast and online events to royalties, merchandising, and endorsement of a wide variety of products. Not every artist endorses products, but many percussionists have a deal with a maker of percussion instruments, and some of the very famous artists have they endorse Adidas. So Beyonce endorses Adidas, and Zakir Hussain, he endorsed one of the teas, and I forget what tea it was, but I've seen him in tea commercials. Questions about this are, how widely is your music culture accessed by people within and beyond your community? How is it accessed most frequently? Through live performances, TV, through internet? How has this changed in the past 5 or 20 years? How do people hear about this music? By word of mouth, by print media, by radio and television, by websites, by social media? Then is there a music industry that contributes substantially to the livelihood of musicians? And finally, what arrangements for protection of ownership, like copyright and IP, exist for your music? And also, is that implemented? Because it exists in many places, but it's not implemented everywhere. Then we come to the final domain, and also almost the end of my talk, because I would love to make this more of a discussion, because I can't see you. It is difficult when you're presenting. I really miss having all of you in front of you, and I wish I was at your campus. Context and constructs, the final domain, and probably the most decisive domain. Context is fairly straightforward, which is assessing the social and cultural context of musical traditions. It examines the realities and the attitudes to recontextualization, cross-cultural influences, ideas of authenticity and context, and explicit and implicit approaches to cultural diversity. And all of these things are very interesting to write, would be very interesting to write up for Mapila. This domain also looks at the underlying values and attitudes to what we call constructs steering musical directions. They include musical taste, aesthetics, cosmologies, socially and individually constructed identities, gender issues, as well as perceived prestige, which is often underestimated as a factor in musical survival. Questions are, what are considered appropriate context for your music? Is your music culture perceived as fixed or constantly in movement? I mentioned that a little bit at the beginning of this talk. How do attitudes to the following guide or influence musical practice in your culture? Aesthetics, gender, environment, religion, media, cosmology, societal roles, nationalism, ceremony, ritual, other cultures. There's long rows that influence people's perception of the particular music. And then finally, and very, very importantly, how do musicians and how does the wider community view music in terms of accessibility, popularity, and particularly prestige? If there's anything we found across the 9 different case studies, it is that the prestige of a music, the esteem in which it is held, is probably the most important driver of sustainability. Because if a music is held in high esteem, people will want to learn it. The musicians will be highly regarded. There will probably be money to build buildings for performances or teaching. There will probably be regulations to support it. It will probably be heard through media and the music industry. And there'll be philanthropists giving money. So a factor like prestige triggers things across all the 5 different domains. And we've seen this with very expensive and difficult to maintain traditions like Western opera, which is exorbitantly expensive for a very, very small group of people. But because it has such high prestige, it is being maintained in many, many different places. So if there's anything you can do to increase the esteem, the prestige within the community for Mapila, that might be the most important thing to do. And we can talk about how you can do that. All of the things I've just been talking about for the past 20 minutes or so can be put into a graph. So these are the 5 domains. On top, the red ones are musicians and community, then the systems of learning music, infrastructure and regulations, media and the music industry, and context and constructs, with the music practice at the very center of these 40 different forces. Depending on the size of your screen, and certainly when you're on the phone, you won't be able to read this, but I'm very happy to send this scheme to the school so it can be distributed to all of you. It's also easy to find. I think, no, Amy mentioned the shortest version in the Oxford Handbook, which is actually on here. the chapter from 2015, Applied Ethnomusicology and Intangible Cultural Heritage, Understanding Ecosystem of Music as a Tool for Sustainability, which is in the Handbook of Applied Ethnomusicology, which Amy spoke so eloquently about. And I didn't know that she used the term as early as 85, because most people only started using them at the end of the 80s, and 92 is the first big publication on applied ethnomusicology. What might be interesting for you, those of you interested in the culture of India, I wrote a chapter on Hindustani music, resilience and flexibility in recontextualizing an ancient tradition. One of the things I found about Hindustani music is that, and many of the top musicians from Ravi Shankar to Zakir Hussain confirmed this, that Hindustani music has always been very flexible in attaching itself to where the power was. So when the power was in the temple or the mosques, then they would be there. If it was at the Mughal courts, they would be there. If it was in the house of rich people and courtesans, they would be there. And if it was in the houses of the new middle class and upper class, they would be there. As soon as the West became interested, they showed up. So Indian musicians, and I'm not saying that as a negative thing, have always been very clever in being where the power was. And the last reference is the entire book that Kathy Grant and myself edited, which is called Sustainable Futures for Music Cultures, an Ecological Perspective, with Oxford University Press. That's all I want to talk about, because my interest is actually much more in the exchange with you than in presenting these. But I'd love to hear from you whether you think that looking at Mapila culture from this perspective, from this sort of idea of a practice surrounded by these different forces in different domains would be useful, or maybe it would be completely useless. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thank you so much for listening. Zoom meetings and Zoom lectures are not the most attractive format to listen to. So thank you, and looking forward to the discussion. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Huib.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Professor Schippers. Actually, a nice presentation. And when I am listening to a talk, actually, what I felt was its closeness. The what we say, the musical parameters, how it can be connected with what we say migration. Actually, see, you have when you have raised some of the research questions. Say first you have raised can we develop a model of framework that maps out all the living practices of music across globe. See, when we look, when you have raised such a question, actually I'm thinking about the first work that we have, the Kerala has developed in the separate field of migration called Kattupat or letter songs. It was the first article came in 1976 by Professor K.N. Raj of Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was earlier the economic advisor to the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. See, when he analyzed that letter song, actually the letter songs includes the various aspects of the emotional aspects, emotional sentiments, emotional life of the left behind families of migrants. See, in that article, he has narrated the emotional aspects of three sets of people who were left behind in Kerala as part of migration. The first one, the parents who were left behind due to migration, and the second one, the emotional aspects of wife, and the third one, the emotional aspects and sentiments associated with kids. So such a framework was developed in 1976 itself, and when we read that particular article, definitely we will be able to understand how that letter song, the music is actually has described the emotional aspects of the migrants who were left behind. So that was actually it was narrated in a good framework, and I do think that even today that narration and the model which has developed by K.N. Raj is much worthy. And when I look at other questions Professor Schippers has raised, the very important question that I have noticed was, is music culture part of indigenous, minority and majority diasporic community. See, actually, even today, that topic is much relevant. See, myself, Professor Haseeb, and another author, and who is a Public Service Commission member, Jinu Zakaria Umman, we together would like to publish one book. Actually, Springer has agreed to publish that book, and it is purely on how migration, culture, and music has provided an identity to the migrants from Kerala. So we are attempting to publish that particular book because when we analyze the letter songs, we are able to understand not only the culture, not only the living habits, not only the living situations of the migrants earlier. Even now, we are able to compare, and we are able to even formulate policy measures regarding what can be done to minimize the emotional aspects associated with detachment. Because if we go in detail to those emotional aspects, as part of JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, we are carrying out so many research projects, and when we are interviewing people, especially the left behind, they are saying much about the emotional aspects, emotional sentiments. So in that way, we would like to publish one book, and Springer has agreed also, and we are thinking to publish it at the end of this year, by December or by March. We will be able to publish that. I do hope that. So thank you, Professor Schippers, for such a vibrant and thought-provoking talk. And definitely, if there arises an opportunity, you have to come to our college directly. So then let's have an offline meeting, and we can meet our students too, our research scholars too, so that it would be much worthy for them. And I'm inviting you to visit with Madam Ami when she is coming next year. Definitely, you have to find some time to join with her so that we can meet at PSMO. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Haseeb.
Thank you so much. And I would love to come and visit your campus. And I agree with you that migration studies, that ethnomusicologists have a lot to learn from migration studies. And in fact, much ethnomusicology is already about music moving from one place to another. It started with fairly static music, but it's more and more a study about music moving all over the globe and changing, and it's absolutely fascinating what happens emotionally, but also what happens musically, and what happens within the society when a music goes from one place to another and recontextualizes itself in another culture. So I would love to come and have a chat with you properly over chai whenever I can make it to Kerala.
Sir, shall I make you one question? See, if sir is able to contribute an article on this musical, these parameters, the topic that you have discussed today, definitely there will be scope for introducing in a book which is being published by us, by Rootlet. That would be very good. I think it will take time. Definitely, we will wait for that. If you are ready, definitely you can contribute an article also, because the questions you have raised here is actually something so relevant. Not only in the musical and ecological, the musical framework field. Instead, it is much relevant in diasporic aspect also, especially to a state like Kerala, where more than, if you look at Malappuram, the district where the college is situating, definitely more than 90% of the people are immigrants. So their remittance is contributing to the economic development of that particular region from 1973 onwards. If you look at migration, definitely people were started migrating from time immemorial, and that actually came to a peak during 1950s, soon after India got independence. And at that time, the migration were actually internal migration and migration to European countries. But when we look at 1973, there is a shift from migration, and people started migrating not to European countries, but in bulk they were started migrating to Middle East countries, because such people were either less educated or unskilled, and majority of such persons came from Muslim community also. So they find some place there at Middle East countries, and that culture directly or indirectly imbibed to their lifestyle. Even now we can look at that. The particular book that I have mentioned earlier actually is focusing on how the Middle East migration, Middle East music, Middle East culture has influenced the lifestyle of the people of Malabar, people of Kerala. So definitely, if Sir is able to join with us, definitely it would be much worthy, sir. That's why I'm mentioning.
Sounds very interesting. Send me an email about this, and we can talk more about it away from this session. So, but by all means, send me an email, and we can talk.
Yeah, Professor Huib.
Share your email ID so that I can send you that particular proposal.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes, so this is our discussion time. So in order to break the ice, let me ask some of my thoughts, share my thoughts with Professor Huib and Amy. So let me give you a brief background of the Mappila music. The Mappila music, the history of the Mappila music goes back to almost the 17th century. Almost the 1607 itself, we have the first Mappila songs in the name of Muhyiddin Mala. So one of the major problem we has been facing throughout these different stages, that the preservation is the very much problematic here, because the contribution of the Arnold Bakke, your predecessors, the importance of the Arnold Bakke came to prominence. While he recorded the Mappila music in the 1930s, but the actual piece of all that music completely lost from the Malabar side. So Arnold Bakke recorded almost all pieces, or it doesn't have their own piece. So that the Mappila music is concerned, preservation is one of the major problems. So could you please suggest me how to preserve these musical notions of the Mappilas? Because we are talking about the 2022 now, and we doesn't have any preservation of the Mappila songs in a clear form, clear manner. Once we are comparing the Mappila music of the 1950s, there the Arnold Bakke recordings is very important. So musical interest is there with Mappilas. They give an importance to the Mappila music, and in fact, almost all the life of the Mappilas can be restudied by analyzing their song. But preservation is the most problematic. So, Professor Huib, could you please suggest some of the practical experience of yours, how to preserve these available Mappila songs for the futures? Because nowadays the Mappila songs are very popular as far as these technological changes, infrastructural changes, everything popularized these Mappila song, but the emotional aspects of the Mappila song began to be very minimal these days. So how we can manage both these, how to develop a emotional aspect to Mappilas, and how to preserve the Mappila songs for the coming generation?
Probably Amy is more qualified to answer that question than I am, but I'm qualified to ask questions. So certainly preserving the recordings that you do have in archives so that future generations can go back to it is something of great importance. Then another thing of great importance is transmission. So I read about schools where people are learning Mappila music, and if people have the enthusiasm to learn contemporary Mappila, for them to get an idea of what it was like to do classes on the repertoire from the 40s and the 50s, and to have people talk about, like yourself, talk about the emotions that are behind it. We've seen music being revitalized like that, not only in India with Dhurpat, which is large, or Odissi dance, which was reconstructed from temple sculptures, but also with what we call early music in the West, where nobody knew what it sounded like anymore. And people sort of reconstructed it and tried from writings of the time to reconstruct the feelings behind it as well. But the most important thing for that to work, as I was mentioning, is it has to be seen as being attractive. If people say, oh, that is old and it's irrelevant, and I'm afraid that that's very often happens with something from 50, 60, 70 years ago, then the risk is that people will not want to learn it, or they will just learn it because they have to, and then they will forget it. So a very important factor is how to make it feel relevant again for the present generation. And if it is relevant to them, then they will learn, because people can learn music in quite incredible ways. But Amy, do you have any comments on this? Because you're so much closer to this, and this is very much your field, much more than mine. Your microphone is off, Amy. So click your microphone on.
Yes, certainly the archiving has begun already at PSMO College, and there has to be a plan for what's going to go into the archive, the audio archives, the digital archives. You probably have competitions, and I know you have annual performances. Colleges have wonderful performances and competitions, and those things are being recorded by all kinds of people, but are they being archived anywhere so that they can be seen in the future? That would be a very good place to begin. Have an archival project. And, you know, the ARCE is your national treasure here. And Dr. Shubha Chaudhry is there, and we're having the 40th anniversary celebration the end of this month, and I hope you'll attend. It'll be 3 days, and starting the 26th. And they give workshops at the ARCE. They have helped to start local archives in many places in India that I didn't even know about, some of them. So they've been very active. One is very important in Rajasthan, for instance, where they kind of acquired or digitized all the collections that Komal Kothari had done at his Folklore Institute in Rajasthan. So these were the recordings that they were able to digitize. They got a grant to do it. It had, you know, it takes manpower and it takes equipment and all of that. But the recordings that are being made now are already digital. So that's one thing. But it's a whole process of starting an archive and keeping things updated, keeping them migrated into current technology. So it's a very complex but very exciting field. And, you know, librarians are beginning to learn archiving. In fact, the librarian at University of Calicut in the folklore department has acquired an archivist's qualification so that they now have an archive in the folklore, the Department of Folklore Studies. And perhaps you can collaborate with her, Dr. Durga. I mean, her name is Srimati Durga. And she might be able to, perhaps you could collaborate, because I don't know how many Mapala recordings they're making in the folklore department. I doubt it. It's going to be up to you, and that's good. You'll be able to control your own archive and learn the techniques for data retrieval and metadata, creation of metadata. That's what we're doing at UCLA now with recordings that we made in 1984 in Kerala. That didn't include any Mapalas because we couldn't get access to Mapalas. We tried, but it took until 1991 and 1994 before we really were able to make recordings. But the 1984 recordings are being cataloged and archived at the University of California Digital Library. They thought that it was a very rich collection that they wanted to foster with all of the notes, all of the metadata, all of the diaries, the logs, the video logs, the data sheets, which we designed to be computer friendly. So it's working out very well. And that's what I've been working on quite a bit this past year. So we must do this at PSMO College also to start off on the right footing and start it out. You can get government support for this, I believe. And recognition. The government of India has programs for recognition through the Sangeet Natak Academy. You know, there are awards given at the state level at Sangeet Natak Academy. I don't know if any Mapalas have received any awards in the Kerala State Sangeet Natak Academy, but that would be an avenue to pursue. Yes, the archive is the answer, and it needs to be institutionalized and broadened into a course. You should probably have some sort of workshops at least to start at the ARCE, where we could ask Dr. Shubha Chaudhry to speak and give her advice. In fact, she's one of the people I'd like to invite once the 40th anniversary is finished next week or next month. We can think about that.
This would be great. So why I'm asking this is because that doesn't mean that we had not any initiation of preservation techniques already. Amy, could you please mute your microphone?
Yes.
So, Professor Huib, we already started a Malabar Heritage Digital Archives under the Jairazbhoy Chair for Indian Ocean Studies, where we collected almost all the Mapla songs, very rare collections of the songs, and we digitalized that with a QR code, and we projected that in their soft copies in front of our college. Then anybody can scan that QR code. They can also accessible to that rare material, because these all the very fragile in condition. Only one last copy is now available with the PSMO college. So we already taken initiative to preserve all these techniques with us. So one of my another concern is that, see, Mapla music is divided into different categories. So some songs are food songs, the songs only related to the food, and some songs are war songs, the songs related to the Mapla revolt against the colonial power, and some songs are rightly pointed out by Dr. Shibinu, the letter songs that are talking about the migration perspective of the Maplas, and some part that's talking about the marriage and the love affairs of the Mapla community. And there are different varieties of the songs are there. So we are very much curious to preserve all these songs, because it is actually a primary source to reconstruct the life of the Maplas itself. Whenever somebody wanted to study about their cuisine, somebody wanted to study about their revolt, they wanted to study their songs, because after studying these songs, that provide you a clear-cut and crystal idea about their life. So that much important this preservation is actually. So now, because of these connections, one of the major problem I identified, the lack of a scholarly approach to the Maplas, that was very minimal. So the important scholars, those who are working in the Indian Ocean landscape, they also given little attention to the Mapla music. That is our primary area to connect this Mapla music with the Indian Ocean world. So that is the prime motive. We organize these type of talk series and these type of discussion with the scholars of eminence, because we wanted to popularize our music beyond the boundary of the Malabar and the India. So once we are talking about the shared sound and shared emotion between land and sea, what your thought? Is it possible to break the boundaries of the Mapla music, and is it possible to attract the scholarly attention to the Mapla music, or we have to do something special to getting this attraction towards the Mapla music? What are your thought on that?
I think Mapla music in itself is interesting enough and worthy of scholarly attention, but there's many things that draw scholarly attention. One thing that has been very, very successful, if there is a government or other funding source, is to fund somebody to do a PhD on Mapla music. So if you get and that could be funded from UCLA or whatever, but if there's some funding available for specific purposes, this has happened across the world, that would be a very effective way of doing things. But also any of the scholars currently working there, by just being at important conferences like International Council for Traditional Music, people have to hear about Mapla music before they can be attracted to Mapla music. So I think you do have a problem that it's not as well known as you want it to be. And if you talk about scholarly circles, I think lectures at gatherings of learned people, and particularly the International Council for Traditional Music, but probably even more effectively seeing if you can get a PhD dedicated to studying this music and also supporting the archives. That would be a very, very attractive way, because that would automatically also lead to conference presentations and book chapters and a book probably. So that would be a very interesting way of putting Mapla music back on the map.
Yeah, great. So, Professor, my dissertation is also on the Mapla music, and I am very fortunate enough. 2019, I presented one of my paper, ICTM conference that held at the Sri Lanka, the University Visual and Performing Arts. And I'm sure that was maybe the first representation of the Mapla community to present on the Mapla music in the platform of ICTM. So with the help of Amy, So our effort is getting fruitfulness because with the help of AMI, me and some of my friends from the Malabar, we also presented in a CM conference in 2020 also. So I'm sure that with all of your help, we can bring these Mapala culture and Mapala songs came into forefront, and we need all your help and assistance to do that, because many of the time we doesn't know about these ICTM conference, SCM conference and everything. It's only possible through this type of interaction we came to know that these are the conferences that are happening in worldwide, and ICTM has one particular branch in the name of South Asian Performing Arts. Then only we able to present my paper and the papers also, those who are related to the Mapala music. So this is actually our motive behind all these talks, to popularize these international conference. Then the Mapala scholars able to present their ideas and their thought in front of a larger audience. That is our vision actually.
I think that's very smart, because I'm still writing about cultural sustainability, and people always ask me for, can you give an example of that? And now I know something about Mapila music, so I might say, wow, Mapila music might be a great example for my next book, and I will write a few pages on Mapila music and other people and refer to your works, and then that will go. So I'm being used for your purposes, but I'm very happy to be used for a purpose this noble. So I think that's a very clever idea. Making a network of, and advising the graduate students here at UCLA, they build up a very broad network so that people know about the work that you're doing, the culture that you're working with, because sometimes it will just come up. Somebody will say, we're looking for an interesting example of this or an example of that. You can't calculate all of this, but make sure that 100 senior scholars across the world know about Mapila music, and things will start coming back. They will say, a doctoral student will say, I don't know what to write about. I'm really interested in the Islamic, the diasporic communities. And they say, would you like to think about Mapila music in Kerala? Because history of 1200 years, fantastic. It's a fantastic story. So I think it's very smart that you're doing this, and fantastic that Amy is helping so much with facilitating this.
So from the audience side, if you have any thought in your mind, you can also share. You can unmute your mic and you can also ask directly. So I do not want to waste any moments of this discussion. That is why I'm also asking, let me ask one more question. You're talking about the sustainability of world music. And my thought is connectedness of the world music, because once we are talking about the Mapila music, we can see that enormous number of connection, especially with the world of the Middle East. So one of the Mapila performing arts, it is specially known as the stick dance, kolkali of the Mapilas. And once we are analyzing these particular kolkali of the Mapilas, we can see that the kolkali is relevant in almost all the Arabian Sea and the Arabian land also. So how we can able to connect the kolkali of the Mapilas and the kolkali of the Nepal, kolkali of the Bhutan, and kolkali of the Arabian land together? And is it possible to sustainability of the world music? Is it equally important to the connectedness of the world music? What do you think?
I think we have seen that individual traditions can be supported, that they don't necessarily have to be connected to other ones. But it is of great academic interest to be connected. And the communities, particularly if they're smaller communities, they feel strengthened if there are similar communities in other places. And one day you may dream of having a festival, getting Mapila music and all the music that are related to Mapila music together. That would be absolutely fascinating from both an academic and an artistic point of view, to have these things come together. Most musics that do really well have people with lots of creative ideas behind them. So in some places, nobody comes up with the idea of a festival. In other places, people do that. I talked to a community of Ga musicians in Ghana, as one of the ethnic groups there. And they had worked out if they fly in 2 plane loads of German tourists to learn drumming for 2 weeks, they can support themselves for the entire year. So they came up with something touristy. The Kachu people that I mentioned, they are doing performances now for rich cultural tourists that want to have an authentic cultural experience from Vietnam. So there's many different ways, but you have to see what kind of connections you can make, whether it is in tourism, whether it is in academia, whether it is in travel, whether it is in international connections, whether it is through connections to important and rich countries in the world of Islam, that you can make those things work. So I don't have all the answers because I don't know Mapila and I don't know what your network is, but I think continuing to think creatively, which I think you're already doing, is the best way. And usually when I'm working with the community, there's like 14 or 15 ideas floating around in the air, and then 2 or 3 of them will land and become something beautiful.
Yes, please. So, Dr. Shibnu, anything in your mind?
No, Asib. Actually, sir has mentioned in one of your questions regarding the close connection between Islam, music, and migration. Sir, could you have any contribution in this field as an article or a book or something else?
That's not really my field. I'm very interested in it, and I'd read books on it, but I would have to do too much research for me to write authoritatively about that. So that would not be a great topic for me. There's other people that know much more about it than I do.
Yeah, Dr. Shibnu, that is the same question that pop up in my mind also. Once you are talking about the religion and political practices in Malabar, and also the technological changes and music in Malabar, I would like to read it together. Because in Mapla music, there is a controversy has been going on whether this music is permissible or not, and if it is permissible, up to what extent. So some clashes has been going on within the religious sphere. So some group, I may call it as a Sunni group, they have accepted this all sort of music, especially the religious backup behind the Mapla community, especially the Mapla music is very strong. So religion is played a very dominant role in order to popularize the concept of the Mapla music, rather than any theoretical aspect and more than any a melodial or emotional aspect. Religion played a very crucial role. And you know why this is important? Because almost all the Mapla poets, those who are composing the songs, they were the ulamas, religious scholars. So almost all the Mapla poets are from the religious scholars. But again, one more problem is related to the religion and Mapla music. Once we are using the music, the instrumental music along with the vocal songs, then the problem is become much more problematic, because they accepted the vocal music, but they never accepted the instrumental music. So this is one of the problem. We have to segregate the Mapla music into 2. The vocal tradition and the music with the instrumental facility. So that is one of the major challenges we have to address too.
Yeah, I think that would make a fantastic chapter to write in. So in my mind, just from hearing what both of you are saying, I think there's a fantastic book on Mapla music that could be written, and having a chapter on this, because this, as you know, Kerala is not the only place in the world where this discussion plays on what is allowed and what's not allowed within Islamic environments. And I think Mapla music would be a very interesting example, because you can clearly see the Islamic elements in it, but still they're different, and it's everywhere. My partner's from Turkey, and in Turkey, there's the same problem for what is okay, what is not okay, and sometimes it's contradictory. We just heard from somebody that if people play music as art music, they get very few audiences and no appreciation. If they play it in the religious circles, they actually get a very big audience, even though it is instrumental music and a lot of appreciation. So this is a field full of paradoxes, music in Islam, and I think Mapila would make a very interesting chapter in that discussion.
Yeah. So that the concept of halal and haram in Mapila music, exactly. We have to look into that halal and haram.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
If we think of song as being sung poetry and not as music, that would help in terms of how to talk about it, how to write about it. It is sung poetry. The poetry is the primary feature, and the fact that it is delivered in a vocal style that is melodious doesn't make it any less textual. It is text first, and the melody is the vehicle.
Yeah, and it's good to remember that the recitation of the Quran, which is very, very melodic. I have a house in southeastern Turkey, and the Hojja there is amazing. So you hear all the maqams, but it's recitation. It's not music. But as you say, Mohammed, it's also instrumental music, which is more frowned upon than vocal poetry.
So more than that, when we look at the migratory and musical interconnections of Malabar, see, the influence of Middle East is actually very much significant, because earlier, when we look at the lifestyle, the present life, if we are able to compare the lifestyle of today with that of earlier times, definitely we can see the strong influence of Middle East countries, and such influences were actually the topic of discussion in many of the letter songs itself. So, but when we look at actually the recording aspect of such songs in the form of a book, actually we cannot find any such work. That is why the present work that I have mentioned with Dr. Rajan and Professor Haji and myself, actually we are concentrating more on such aspects, so that we will be able to cover its significance. And those who would like to search more, definitely that book will be a useful one, because we have collected so many data on that earlier data. So we are actually archiving, in a sense, in the form of a book.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Sounds really interesting. Sounds like would be really important publication for understanding Kerala and Mapila.
Yeah. So I'm sure the time is getting late from the Professors Huib and Ami's view. So actually we will going to wind up within 5 minutes, that is for sure. So the last part, just I wanted to share with you. You see, the composing style of the Mapila songs, that's also connected to the religious perspective. Because the composing style of the Quran and the Quranic verses that we can see in the Mapila part composition as well. Because, for example, one surah, one particular chapter in Quran, Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, all the ending notes are very similar. And this is the way Mapila songs also composing. So it's like not only religious views reflected in the Mapila songs, but also the style of the Quran also even reflected the composition of the Mapila songs. That's also one thing I would like to share with you. And as you mentioned about these 5 domains of the musicians and community, in the community is, the Mapila music and community is closely related. We cannot imagine the life of the Mapila community without their music. So that's much important. And the respect which provide to the Mapila singers is also very high. And the second one, system of learning the music that is very much important is Guru Shishya Parambara, the Guru Shishya tradition, the student and teacher relation, especially related to the Mapila music, it's getting lost its relevance these days. Because we are no more talking about the teachings of the schools and colleges, but unfortunately the universities and the schools doesn't have any plan to add these Mapila music as a part of their curriculum. So they're one of the major challenges we have to address. So these Guru Shishya Parambara is getting lost its relevance these days. But of course, some pockets, as you may rightly seen in the Rolf Kilius video, in some pockets of the Malabar, especially in Ponnani, we have some sort of these Guru Shishya tradition is still prevalent. But in all the, once I'm talking about the years back, almost 50 years back, each and every villages of the Mapala community has their own special schools of teaching the Mapala music. But now its relevance is completely lost. We have to repatriate into that aspect also. Then the third one, infrastructure and regulation, infrastructure and for the fund aiding. The government is, yes, the government has some of the agencies in the name of Mapala Kala Academy and the Kerala Council for Historical Research and everything. But the special fund, especially into the research of the Mapala music and all, very minimal. We have to approach the government for raising fund and all. So your third point is very, very attractive for me because we have to make that infrastructure very strong. So in order to make that infrastructure very strong, we need some fund. So we have to approach the government side for that. I'm sure we will, under the Baki Jairazbhoy Chair for Indian Studies, the Department of History and MK Haji Chair for Migration Studies definitely look into that aspect, how to mobilize fund for making the infrastructure strong. And the third one, this media and music industry, that also one of the major aspects in the Mapala culture, because this special point we had discussed in the last talk also, because of this media and musical culture, a variant that happened within the Mapala community that is otherwise known as the cassette culture. So a cassette culture of the Mapala songs deviate from the original essence of the Mapala song. So again, a controversy has been going on, which Mapala Patu is considered as the original form, whether it is the pure Mapala song or it is with the cassette culture of the Mapala song. These cassette songs, otherwise known as the album songs. So a controversy has been going on, whether album song is categorized as the Mapala songs or the traditional Mapala song categorized as the original Mapala song. So as far as your point, media and musical industry is concerned, this debate is also going on among the Mapala community. Then the context and construct that always prevalent because almost many Mapala families, prominent families, they are ready to provide almost all support to keep these Mapala songs for the coming generation as well. So I'm very much thanking you for providing these 5 domains. Then I can arrange my thought in accordance with this point, and I'm sure that I'm able to solve many of the Mapala musical problems by analyzing these 5 different parameters. And we are very delighted to hear you, Professor Huib, and very thanking you for providing a thoughtful discussion for last 1.5 hours.
Thank you. If what I said can help in any way in doing that, not in every way, then I'm just I'm completely delighted. This is really why we developed this thing, to help people think in a slightly different way of how can we support our thing. So if these 5 domains help you in strategizing how you can support Mapila songs, then I've had a fantastic day. So that's all the reward we need for the research we're doing. Again, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a complete delight. It's always been strange to a screen with just letters of people. I hope that the students got something out of this, but I'm sure that you'll follow up with them in thinking more of this. I'm making the students here at UCLA work out the different domains for music for themselves as they make it. So the final assignment for their undergraduates will be create a plan for one of the traditions you're working with based on the 5 domains. So what would you do to make the music stronger? So we had 85 people or something on the line. You've got 85 people.
Actually provoked our thoughts also, because we are thinking so earnestly about how we are able to record all these things, especially music, migration, Islam, and different aspects of that. So your presentation was such a beautiful, in such a beautiful line that we actually provoked many of our thinking also, because I have written so many points from your slides, because the same way we are planning to raise some of the questions. some of the questions to those who are. See, actually, I'm actually interviewing presently some of the philanthropists who are migrants also. So when I saw your presentation, it has added so many points to my mind. In what way they have been skewed? In what way they have the points in their mind can be skewed to the to record the migration, music, Islam, and such interlinking aspects together in the form of a book. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm actually thanking you from the bottom of my heart, because your presentation was such a vibrant one, and your presentation the questions in the presentation was also thought-provoking. Thank you very much.
Really my pleasure. I'm so glad it was useful.
And for connecting.
Thank you, Amin, also.
And one last word, Professor Huib, your presentation was actually the answer to all our questions. So we will definitely work on that. We will definitely look into that 5 domain, and we will try to fix the problem as early as possible. And I will promise under the budget for migration studies, we will work on your thought and with you, and we will definitely keep these popular songs intact for the conversation. That type of thank you once again. Let me wrap up this session.
Thank you. You're breaking up a little bit, but this all sounds wonderful. If I can be of any help, so if you've written something down and say, can you look at this? I'm very happy to have a look at things and
thank you.
And work with you. Whatever I can do to help within the time that I have. And Amy, once again, thank you for being the conduit to make all this happen and for inviting me. Really very pleasurable experience. I learned a lot tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Okay then.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
It would be good to hear something from Ma'am Amy also.
Amy, do you want to conclude the session?
Oh, yes, this has been absolutely
Yeah, please.
A perfect experience of sharing knowledge, and I see this as a wonderful new start, a new beginning for Mapla song and dance and drumming and all of the things that we call music together. This is a wonderful connection now that we have to Professor Huib Schippers, his insights and his tremendous experience in project management and archiving and field research and conceptualizing the situation with the Mapulas. Mapulas are in a constant state of migration. It is a constant. It has been going for over 1,000 years. The back and forth, and the people being left behind to listen to letter songs and to compose letter songs. So it's a deep source of emotional of knowledge, of emotional experiences of these letter songs, the Katapata. So thank you so very much for interacting so beautifully together. This was my dream come true. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you all. Goodbye. Good luck with everything. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Amy. See you later.
Good. See you later, Hasid. Be well. Khuda Hafiz.